All right, there we go. So my name's Scott Cuthbert, co-founder of Safeopedia, and with me today is, as always, Sarah Bellini Ross for another exciting episode of Hard Hats and Heart. And today we've got a special guest that Sarah will introduce, and Marcin will introduce himself. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Marcin Nazaruk. He's done some presentations at Safety Connect in the past, and we've had a lot of interaction over the years. So really interested in digging in, and I love the tag making the invisible visible because I think some people have talked about it or flirted with that idea, but that's just the perfect way to describe it, and I'm really looking forward to digging in on that. So Sarah, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Scott. What a great teaser to Marcin and his work. You have, I think, everybody on their edge of the seats to learn more. So why don't we just jump right in and Marcin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott, Sarah, Safeopedia, for the invitation and for having me today. Well, my name is Marcin. It's like Martin with the C instead of T. Same name, different languages. Originally, I'm from Poland, but I've been in the UK for now nearly 20 years. And so my journey started in psychology, and I was very interested in that aspect of how this works. And initially, I wanted to go into counseling, but decided it's not my cup of tea. And so then transitioned to occupational and organizational psychology. And after finishing my degree, I came to the UK to do my practitioner doctorate in specifically in industrial psychology and safety culture and safety leadership. And I emphasized the practitioner doctorate because it was not a regular PhD where people sit at the university and then do some research and write a thesis. I was for all 3 years placed in a heavy manufacturing organization. My job was to introduce change by using or drawing from science, safety science, and then use that experience to write the thesis. So following that, I've had opportunity to work in power generation and then moved to oil and gas. I held a number of global roles, and with that journey came also a set of different experiences and exposures to different tools and techniques. I was involved in managing long time ago behavioral safety program. I was then responsible for human factors in accident investigations. I was the global lead for safety culture change. And the most recent experience from the corporate world was I was responsible for a global deployment of human and organizational performance. And on that journey, I've had the privilege to be exposed to those different tools, techniques, different frameworks, and ways of thinking. But many of them had a strong focus on the learning from failure. And as we were then evolving how we learn from failure, we started noticing that we can find the same things when there is no failure, when there is no accident. And this was the beginning of what I do now, learning from normal work. Over the years, I was able to bring in science, operationalize it for practical application, work with both senior executive leaders and the frontline alike, and put it together in a way that is applicable, adds value, makes difference, and people enjoy it. And so here today, I hope to give you some examples of how that works in practice. Because to Scott's point, many things that contribute to risk tends to not be visible or observable or available to those who manage risk. And so we want to make those things visible through practical tools and approaches. And the things that will create our next accident or a next accident in the organization exist today. It's just people deal with those things effectively most of the time. So learning from normal work is a practical, research-backed approach to identifying precursors of future accidents before they happen.
Could you tell us a little bit more about like what inspired you to go from learning to from the failures in your corporate experience where you saw so much of the safety programs were really built around those failures? What inspired you to kind of think proactively to looking at these invisible factors that contribute to the risks?
Hmm. So there is a personal note in there because as I was studying organizational psychology and then industrial psychology and all this research and accessing the theories and frameworks and models, so I had that bucket, right? At the same time, I was also going through the training in the safety qualifications, and then because I was in the front line, I was inside the organization, I could also see the practical aspects of it. I could see how people were doing it. And that created a big mismatch for me. What I saw in those practical courses and qualifications and what I saw in practice by very experienced professionals, recognized, very well known, um, there was a mismatch between that what I was learning in through academia and research and that practical application. And that was one aspect. The second aspect was that what I saw in practice, I had a feeling that it's not making a difference, that this is superficial scratching the surface. And that led to that personal feeling of frustration, that there must be something more than just labeling behaviors in different ways. Um, and that feeling of frustration combined with the desire to make genuine difference and be practically useful, um, then fueled my search for something that could bridge those worlds. So bring the insights from academia and research and apply it in a way that would not require a master's degree in human factors, that would work with the safety professionals and operational leaders without the need for super specialized education or very advanced techniques. And that feeling of frustration and mismatch was driving me. And then throughout my career, through the different job roles I had opportunities to test, apply, make mistakes, um, find better ways, get feedback from frontline, from the supervisors, from the site leaders, from the global leaders, and then figure out how to realize that theory I was finding in research papers in a very practical terms, without jargon, without referring to models that tend to lose people. Um, and so I think it took a number of years of ups and downs and mistakes and failures, and many things didn't work. And but I think we finally got to the point where I'm happy now. I can give those tools with a little bit of support in the introduction to the practitioners, and they can find things that they were not able to see or they were not visible to them before.
Let's talk about the mistakes and learning from failures in your own experience. What was one of those mistakes from the early days that you wish you would have known differently now?
Hmm. So, um, so one of the early mistakes um, was trying to use the academic language when talking about um, what to do and talking about the aspects of work. Um, and so, and I see, perhaps I'm not alone with that. But the mistake is you bring a model or a framework, you try to explain it using the words from a textbooks or from a research paper, and then those working in the front line is look at you and you're like, what is this? Are you wasting my time? This is not helpful. Um, like we're not here, we are not at school. Just give me something useful. Tell me what to do. Give me something that makes a difference. rather than this theorizing. So it was a kind of rude awakening. Um, and this confrontation actually was very helpful because it's required a different way of thinking about using the science. I could not just copy and paste or simplify. I needed to take the idea, I needed to understand what this is, and then translate it into something that is simple and doable. Another mistakes, and this is the coming from the reiterations. How we ask questions, what we focus on, how we report the information that we get, all those different aspects that we were reiterating on an ongoing basis based on the feedback, the quality of insight that we are getting, the usefulness of what we were getting from those early learning efforts.
Great. Thanks for sharing about some of those mistakes. It's always good to kind of hear those lessons learned and help other people from making those same mistakes. My experience in public health is very similar to your kind of using that academic language and then having leaders and even frontline workers be like, what are you talking about? You're from a different world and that doesn't resonate with us.
Mm.
Are there any human-centered design influences and kind of within that learning from normal work framework? Do you see any correlations between the two?
Absolutely. So human-centered design, um, usability areas, those are big areas when you think about um, creating work environment. And I think they're also often either not known or misunderstood. And in many cases, they sit in siloed niches of expertise. Um, I was lucky enough to get exposure to the engineering psychology and different aspects of usability and human centered design. And actually, in one of the modules that we teach, we teach human centered design. So it does bring a additional perspective or a lens that we can arrange different aspects of the work environment to optimize human performance. And on its own, the idea is not new at all. Um, you can link it back even to Deming, um, over 100 years ago. But somehow that very important and powerful idea I see being lost in both the mainstream safety education and practice, where tends to be dominated by either focus on behavior in isolation or this in being disconnected from the work environment and its influences, or in overemphasis on the black and white compliance. Whereas if we think about work environment with its different aspects of the design of tools, design of equipment, design of space, design of the task, design of the infrastructure surrounding that, and other components, we can actually very powerfully drive the desired behavior, reduce the risk, reduce the likelihood of mistakes, and improve human performance. So definitely, this is an area that sits, for example, in human factors engineering disciplines or engineering psychology, but it can be simply presented and used powerfully to contribute to the meaningful improvement.
It's great. It just makes a lot of sense, really, when you think about how they can relate and how the value of human-centered design brings into the learning process. Can you tell us really like what does learning from normal work look like in the real world when it's applied? What does that look like for an organization?
Excellent. So let me do a few words of introduction. So let's start with what is normal work. So normal work is about how people adapt to the challenges and changes, dynamic changes in their work environment. And so, for example, every time there is people lift a load, there may be something different about that situation. Additional people in the area, the right type of lifting slings not being available, one person being off work. And so workers needs to deal with those changes. And how they deal with those changes is through adaptations. This is perhaps a big word for a very simple thing, is that you try to find a solution by using a combination of your knowledge and experience based on the circumstances that you are in. And so this is happening, and everyone adapts. It's not only about the front line. Managers also adapt because they face challenges from budget, time, customers, etc. And so now learning from normal work is about proactively identifying those things that make the work difficult, challenging, or frustrating. And so this is the basic premise. This is the foundation, and enabled by that, now we can then find the those conditions and circumstances in a proactive manner, and those things, when failure happens, when there is an incident, they're labeled as causes or contributing factors to accidents. Now, if there is no accident, it doesn't make sense to ask why did it happen, because like, what happened? There is no failure. That question doesn't make sense if there is no failure. So we need to shift the focus and the questions that we ask. And so here we can, instead of asking why failure happened or why it happened, because that doesn't make sense, we ask about what makes it difficult. And so that's the foundation. And so then what it means for organizations at the high level, because later in a moment we can go into more specific examples. What it means for the organization is that applying learning from normal work gives them the mindset, tool set, and skill set that enables them to identify aspects of work that contribute to risk that would not be captured through other processes and efforts. I hope to tell you about example of the risk assessments or leadership conversations or task reviews where we identify those conditions. We call them arrow traps, or in the OGP guide, I use the word constraints, because those are the things also that constrain the choices that people have. And so by doing so, by identifying those things, now the organization shed light, identify, and can do something about those things, so they can address and therefore reduce the risk. So it's a powerful and practical way of proactively reducing the risk by finding the precursors of future accidents.
Have you noticed any trends of what are some of those common precursors that you see across different organizations?
So that's a wonderful question, and the answer may depend. So first one is, if we started collecting data about the different types of those arrow traps, what we're likely to see is that those would be unique to each organization. Because if we think about the work that people perform, they've been selected according to certain criteria. They've received certain type of training to prepare them for the job. They work with tools. They work under the time constraint. They work in a certain physical space under certain supervision according to certain rules and processes, and so on. So this is there is that broad environment that people interact with. And so the risk of failure stems from the weaknesses in how those different aspects of work are provided or resourced. So, for example, if you need 3 people for the lifting job, but one person was called off and now there are just 2 of you, your risk is higher and people may start adapting. If following the procedure step by step takes 5 hours, but now you have only 3 hours because the customer called and say that you need to leave the site in 3 hours, then that may increase the risk and lead to adaptation. So the risk will be unique to the circumstances. And when you start collecting data, it will be unique to the organization. So when we therefore look at how different organizations try to trend that data, we see that variability. For some, they've got more weaknesses, for example, with procedures and training. With others, they have more weaknesses with time, supervision, or design of tools and equipment. So it's difficult at the moment to generalize those over across companies or across industries. And even then, even if we did, because the more data you have, there would be more of something and less of something else. But then I don't know how useful that would actually be, because if the risk associated with the activity stems from a combination of how those different aspects of work interact and interplay, then saying, for example, that procedures are out of date because it was the biggest number, 40% across made up number across different organizations, I don't know how useful that is. For me, it would be more helpful to look into or to ask a question: can we as an organization identify those aspects of work to high quality without labeling and judging behavior, and then take the action to address those things to meaningfully reduce the risk? That would be a more powerful question for me than pointing to one particular category.
What challenges do you see organizations have when they're trying to shift their mindset to the learning from normal work way of really trying to find those air traps? What are those common kind of challenges that you see across places?
Before organizations get to the stage where implementation is given a green light, a number of things needs to happen. Of course, the key stakeholders and leaders needs to be supportive of the idea and the tools and the implementation effort that comes with it. But this is also the first potential obstacle. As we look across companies and industries, we see that leaders have different ways of thinking about why accidents happen. And sometimes they have very strong beliefs that may not be too helpful. So, for example, if a leader has a strong conviction that the main cause of accidents in their organization is, for example, complacency or procedural non-compliance, and this is what they strongly, strongly believe, and this is what they are focusing on and investing in, this organization may have a hard time moving into the implementation of learning from normal work, because doing so requires reframing how we think of how accidents happened and reframing the role of behavior, moving beyond the idea that the root cause is non-compliance or human error or complacency or other labels being used. And so the initial challenge is with helping leaders to wrap their head around what does it mean? What are the alternatives? What are the options? And then see the value in it. Because, from the point of view of a senior leader, you've got this spectrum, this library of different options that you see in conferences and different companies offering and different views that are out there and different solutions, right? From behavioral to all sorts of things. And so now they need to see value in this approach. And so it helps that the IOGP, so the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, for example, published a guidance on learning from normal work that I was very privileged to lead the writing effort of. So that helps. And then we have how we deal with this challenge is we take leaders on a journey. Typically, one day suffice, but it's a journey of rediscovery of what risk means and reframing behavior from non-compliance to adaptations, being able to identify constraints, being able to see how using terms like overconfidence or not paying attention or is not helpful and limits the learning, and then equipping them with some basic skills tends to suffice to help them reframe that. But working with leaders or leaders understanding and appreciation of what it is, what it means, and how this can add value is a challenge that every organization that is interested in this faces. Now, learning from normal work is very much aligned and draws from HOP as well. So it also helps that HOP, human and organizational performance, has grown in popularity in the last decade. And many organizations who have been exposed to HOP or the HOP principles that also are in a good position because now they've had that basic introduction to the philosophy, and often they ask, okay, what now? What can we do? What's the practical solution? What's the how we can now turn it into something useful and value adding? And so this is also where learning from normal work helps, because it takes the philosophy, but not only from HOP, it draws from human factors, resilience engineering, safety too, and turns it into a framework and a program that can be implemented at small scale and a big scale.
So now we have the buy-in from the leadership because they've gone through your journey, you've helped shift their mindset. What are some of those strategies that they can help to really get that mindset to trickle throughout their organization?
Oh, wonderful. So there are a number of strategies that leaders can use. So the most simple is start setting expectations that we want to learn before we take any other course of action, before we start talking about the consequences, etc. Right? So the leader's response not only to failure, because of course that matters and is important, but when there is no failure, then leaders can set expectations and communicate that expectation, that we want to learn and find things that make the work difficult. Then we've got the importance of cascading those expectations. So if we think of an organization that has 5 or 6 levels, we would like the top leader to set expectation that the level below set that expectation to the level below, which then set this expectation to the level below. So that helps with cascading. Then I've seen wonderfully where I've seen a very senior leader at the executive vice president level who was having monthly review meeting with directors and vice presidents, and he would ask them to share examples on that call of how they learned from the workers, how they listened, right? So So they would have to demonstrate how they did that. And so that created this positive, kind of friendly, but still competition. As in, hey, I want to show good stuff that I did. I want to be visible. I want to be noticed. I want to share, and also I want to share with others, and I want others to learn from my experience. And so I've sat through many of those calls, and it was wonderful to see how very senior leaders then started. Um, it challenged the thinking, it challenged the practices, and it shifted over a number of months, this focus, and they were then bringing examples. Some were very good, some were imperfect, but nevertheless there was that group dynamic that was focusing on how can we learn about the imperfections, about the gaps, about the needs of the people who do the work. So there is that leadership aspect. Then we've got, of course, sharing personal stories. Those can be shared informally in small meetings, in large group meetings, and there is also place for using help of the communications department as well, to integrate this narrative, these expectations, the stories and examples into the communication efforts, whether these are newsletters or in the internal social networks, websites, or regular emails. There is place for that. And when all those different aspects are aligned and coordinated, it sends a powerful message across the organization about the priorities, but also it helps to operationalize those, showing examples of what it means, what we did, what worked, what perhaps didn't work. That's okay. That's a learning. That's a learning as well. And then, of course, separately, we've got tools and those learning efforts that are separate from leaders setting expectations.
Sounds like frontline workers really play a critical role in being able to help identify these air traps and bring up the things that make the work dangerous or difficult or challenging. What are some of those effective ways to start those conversations, maybe when there isn't that culture of being able to talk about those things within an organization?
Yeah, so we've got a couple aspects to this, and cultural readiness is a factor to consider, but it's not as big a barrier as we may think if other enablers are in place. So if we've got the leadership buy-in and support and the expectations, and so then we can, when we spend time with the people doing the work, we can do it to different levels of depth. We can have a short conversation, 5-10 minutes, asking a few basic questions, like, help me about this job. What are the steps? Tell me about what makes them difficult. What is frustrating? What do you need but you don't have? A few simple questions. Now, they sound simple. They require some practice actually to ask them well and to listen well and take that and not go back into what, you didn't follow a procedure. Yep. So it requires a little bit of preparation, but this is one short conversation. But with short means that just by the function that of time available, you will hear few pieces, but probably not as much. So then we could spend a little bit more time, half an hour, 1 hour, 90 minutes. And we've got a great tool that is called walkthrough, talkthrough. So this is where we go through step by step, and then we ask those questions for each step. Now, the reason behind it is that different steps have different potential severity. So there are steps that can release energy that can kill. Other steps will not have that potential. And also different steps are influenced by different error traps. So with this step, the gauge is not working. And so here, I'm trying to gauge the pressure by sensing the vibration. On the other step, the valves look the same, there's no labels, and it's very confusing, and sometimes I almost open the wrong valve. So different steps have different potential error traps. And so by asking step by step what makes those steps difficult, we can get a deeper insight into the risk associated with that activity. And then we could spend even more time and, for example, organize a group discussion with a worker. So we could have 2, 3, 5, 8 people doing the work, or maybe even add other people who support the work, like HSE, like engineering, like facilities, and have that conversation. Now, those conversation would be called learning teams, as this is a team that is learning together, and those, including preparation and setup and actually conducting the conversation, the follow-up, those can take multiple hours. And so that, but they can give you even more. And then perhaps at the other side, side of the spectrum is a systemic review. So this is where we would talk to a number of different people, not only the frontline workers, but then we would talk to the engineers and understand. From the worker, we would understand how design sets them up for failure, but from the engineer, we would understand how the design requirements are integrated into the product design or procurement process. Or we could go into, with the worker, review a procedure step by step, but then go to the procedure owner and understand the aspects of the document management system and constraints that create those error traps. Or we could, for example, explore decision making or other types of constraints and resources, and then talk to those owners. So by expanding that picture, we not only now talk to the operators, but we talk to other people in different support functions, from procurement to engineer to facilities to HR, and then we get their perspective, and from that view, a picture of a system starts emerging. So you see in my background this those lines and dots. This is a symbolic representation of a system, how different aspects are co-connected in non-linear fashion. And this is a symbolic representation of an organization, and how the risk, therefore, is co-created by inputs coming from different teams and functions at different levels of the hierarchy, as those different people adapt to their respective constraints over time, affecting the risk profile. And so, of course, with organizations, they decide where they want, what they want to do and what they want to focus on. Many want at least a few of those. So more often shorter conversations, but then have those deep dives as well, to continue capturing those precursors of accidents before they happen.
What role do you see technology playing in capturing and being able to learn from normal work? And are there any tools that you would recommend?
So so very simply, of course, we need technology to capture the information, right? And so this is very basic stuff. Capture, be able to monitor and trend and provide feedback and that. But I think, and most organizations will have systems that with little tweaking can do just that. But I think with the emergence of artificial intelligence, I think there is a fascinating use case for how this can help. So the way we started using AI is to build a custom model to help people who participate in our program or training to develop their learning skills. So, for example, we have a model that acts as have a dual role. acts as a worker and as a coach. So it gives you a scenario of a very realistic activity, whether that's lifting or cleaning a tank in confined space. And the scenario is that now you approach the worker and you start the conversation. And the model is trained to respond differently to different questions that you ask. So, for example, if you ask, um, why you don't follow the rules? If you ask this question is emotive. With human being, if you ask this question, it's likely to trigger defensiveness. The person wouldn't tell you much; they would get into defensive. And so this is what the AI agent replicates. They would give you a dismissive answer, or they even can stop the conversation. They say, "I don't want to talk to you." Um, but if you ask the open questions that we teach, like, tell me about the work, what makes it difficult? The model or the worker in this role play will respond more openly and will volunteer more information. But then after the response from the worker, the model will also give you feedback. So it will tell you what was the question type that you've asked, what's the likely emotional response that you get, whether you are likely to put the person at ease, or whether this is more defensive or angry, or etc. So we've injected this the emotional spectrum into that, and we'll give you feedback on how you can tweak your questions for the next round. So in the next round, again, you can improve now, ask a better question, and in that cycle. And what is also fantastic about this particular tool is that it seamlessly translates across languages. So now just the person say, okay, I speak Portuguese, I speak Polish, I speak Thai, and it switches to the language, and it moves on. And so we did testing even with some dialects, and so the person said, "Oh, I didn't expect this level of accuracy speaking the local dialect." So that was very impressive. But I think this is one way, and I think then the applications with that mobile phone applications that combine AI um, and the vision technology, so that the application can recognize what they see, right? So you could point your phone or camera at the workplace, and it can identify hazards, source of danger, source of energy, but also give you some ideas for the questions that you could ask that would not be oversimplifying or blaming or just verifying compliance, but would be generally focused on learning and uncovering the what lies beneath and things which are difficult to observe.
Somebody who loves technology, I loved hearing about your use of AI and just the power of mobile phones today. I think that's just such a great tool for so many of us in the workplace. That's definitely underutilized and just continuing to evolve at lightning speed. Are there any memorable success stories from that have resulted from your work with organizations and implementing learning from normal work that you wanted to share about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll mention a few that stuck with me. Um, One is seeing the thinking transformation happen in real life among the group of senior leaders. So a couple of months ago, I had a privilege to deliver the Mindset Shifter workshop to a large group of almost 100 senior leaders in a large multinational organization. Um, and as we were going through the exercises at the beginning, uh, I see the common views and those oversimplified perspectives on safety. But as we go along, I see those aha moments, and it's just those eyes. Oh my gosh, I can see that now. Yes, I would do the same thing if I was this guy in the front line. Oh yes, I can ask my questions so much better. So this is wonderful, and And doing that with a large group, and seeing how those different peoples connect and how they leave the room energized, that's very satisfying. Another one is how we integrated error traps into the risk assessment process. So typical task level risk assessment, like job safety analysis or HIRA, different names, typically they focus on identifying hazards and controls. Some versions will break the task into steps and then identify hazards for each step and controls for each step. So this is where in that particular organization, we were able to take their existing risk assessment, talk to the person doing the job that the risk assessment related to, and we were able to find, without failure, without having accidents, a range of different problems, issues, and challenges that were not classified or were not identified by the original risk assessment. In fact, would not be identified by the risk assessment, because what we call error traps and constraints is a different category of factors that hazards typically do not consider. When we think about hazards, think about what can cause harm, do not those things like training that doesn't cover the skills that you need for the job, and a procedure that is applicable to a different model of the equipment, or the valves that look the same. Things like that are not classified as hazards typically. And so, but they are there and they contribute to risk. And so we were able then to identify new things. And what we found through that proactive conversation with the person doing the work, turned out that this organization had an incident sometime earlier, where those things that we found proactively contribute to quite a serious accident, which was a wonderful example how we can find very tangibly precursors of the accident before it happened. Another memorable example is when we helped another organization to integrate proactive learning into the Gemba process. So Gemba is a term that is more common in manufacturing, and the word Gemba means go to a place where work is happening. So philosophically, it's very aligned. But when it comes to practical application, this approach was focused on asking very limiting, closed-ended questions. And so when we integrated and turn it into a simple conversational framework, and then we asked our participants to go in small groups to the shop floor, to the areas that they are familiar with, that they work in, they were able to identify new challenges. And then in that, the most enjoyable part is when we ask for feedback from the worker that we talk to. And we ask, how was this conversation different from other conversations that you've experienced in last weeks, couple weeks or months? And they say, oh, it was different. I felt relaxed. It was fun to tell you about it. You were like listening to me. You took seriously what I had to say, and this feedback is warming my heart up, because this is where I see the magic. And through those experiences, we've got then increased trust and increased engagement. And then the workers themselves come up to the leaders saying, oh, hey, there's something else, or I forgot to tell you. And it creates that dialogue. And the last one, memorable, I mentioned, is we also apply learning from normal work to the investigations. So, but instead of using the root cause analysis, we approach it from the point of view of systems thinking and reviewing constraints for work, recognizing that the risk and the workplace, the work happens in that context of multiple different uh, elements, right? So from process to rules to supervision to time and different resources. So we don't search for root causes, but we want to identify the weaknesses and gaps and misalignments and where mismatches are between what is needed to execute work well, efficiently, to high quality, and with strong management of with strong control of risk. Um, and so we look into that. And so the memorable experience is where after one of the exercises where we help participants to recognize and reframe judgmental language. So we give them, for example, examples of judgmental language, like the worker ignored the training, or they failed to identify hazards, which are just assumptions and labels. And then reframe it. I remember this one leader saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe how entrenched that that tendency or temptation to put a label on the worker is, and to assume that the unsafe behavior happens because they're doing something wrong or they are complacent, etc. So seeing where leaders get those aha moments is tangible and is very satisfying. And so I'm sorry, one more. At the high level, I love seeing the enterprise transformation. We have a number of enterprise level projects where we implement this across the boards, across the levels of hierarchy, from senior leaders to the front line. And it's wonderful to see how this big ship of a big multinational corporation is changing its course, and how the tone changes, how communication changes, how expectations change, how the new findings lead to new solutions. That is extremely satisfying to me, as somebody who was, put a lot of effort finding my way to add value and make the world a better place.
Those aha moments are definitely where the magic happens. If somebody's interested in learning more about learning from normal work, how would they go? What are some ways that they can do that?
So first of all, check out my website, learningfromnormalwork.com. We've got case studies, examples, recordings of webinars where practitioners from different companies and sectors talk through their experience. Then we've got the guidance on learning from normal work published by IOGP. This is report number 642. Simple find in Google, and also now it's been published in Portuguese as well. There is an article that I wrote for the US Safety Practitioner magazine on learning from normal work that is like 6-page long introduction. On my website, there is a video course as well as email course, all free, just to give people an introduction to what it is, or just reach out and schedule a call. I love those conversations and helping people to make sense of this and see the differences between learning from normal work and other efforts that large organizations tend to invest in. And so, yeah, these are some basic steps.
Scott, I've stolen all of the
Yeah.
time we've had today with Marcin. Is there any other questions or any thoughts you wanted to add?
Well, yeah, I definitely have some questions. I know we're sort of at time today, but Marcin and I have talked over the years about doing some work with the Safeopedia community, and I think that I'd like to, set up a follow-up where we kind of focus on those small, medium-sized organizations, because I think that for our audience and our community, there's a lot of folks out there that are probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed with, the idea of transitioning, or transforming leadership's, language and the way they think and approach safety. And so I think it would be valuable, step two to, or interview two to focus on those small, medium-sized organizations, because I know you have an amazing practical approach that can be easily implemented compared to some of the other kind of programs that are out there. So definitely encourage people to go to the site, check out the website, and watch for some follow-ups.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. It would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing more about learning from normal work. This was a great conversation, and just I absolutely love your approach and think it brings a lot of value and just absolute like real world applicability to so many different ways that we can improve safety of organizations. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Marcin.